liaison, who's more awesome than me for sure. And she has done this needs assessment as part of our new program to make sure that we're really reaching out to victim advocates in the field and closing in those gaps. And so we're going to spend the first part talking about just what led up to this and what's part of the needs assessment, what the findings, recommendations, and what we're going to do about it. Oh, I love this. Okay, so another needs assessment, right? We have so many of these. If some of you might remember a few years back, we did have one with the trauma-informed care to kind of see how well everybody out there knows what trauma-informed care means, and some recommendations from that. We took those recommendations, made another needs assessment out of them, right? Another portion of this needs assessment, making it different than anything we've done in a long time, is getting direct input from victims and survivors of crimes. That obviously takes a lot more paperwork to do because you are getting information from vulnerable populations. So we really wanted to get their perspective, which is extremely valuable. Identify victim service providers to improve the services and increase and improve access for crime victims. Okay, some of the same things you said, but the main objectives for this needs assessment was to identify gaps. Where are victims falling through the cracks in the system? I'm sure I could ask all of you guys that today. I'm sure a lot of this will not be surprising to you. But yeah, I've known that all along. I work in the system, right? But we can bring this data forward in a more quantifiable manner. And helping to bring those experiences to light, we have both quantifiable and qualitative data from both victims and service providers. And then we also want to talk a little bit about the experience that victim advocates have had as far as caseloads, training, the needs and gaps, what they see in the system, as well as what crime victims are seeing and their experience specifically in the criminal justice system. Okay, so we had two different populations as part of our survey that we conducted. This was all done last fall in 2021. So we had a group of victims and survivors, and then we had a group of advocates and stakeholders. I think this is, yeah, I'll come back to that one, but we did both surveys as well as interviews. Yep, here we go. So we partnered with the University of Utah Criminal Justice Center to do all this research. Like I said, we had a grant to pay for it, so that's always great. And we did two surveys. We had a survey specifically for crime victims and their experience and all of the things we just talked about, and a survey specifically for victim service providers. Anybody here participate in this? Anybody fill out a survey? All right, cool. Thank you guys. Thank you. So we tried to disseminate this as much as possible, really encourage people to fill out surveys, somebody likes to, but it is helpful. And then also we sent this survey out to the service providers to send on to the people they serve. That was obviously a lot trickier to send it off to the people who are getting services because they're a lot harder to contact. So we sent it off to you all to send off to your people, and a lot of people did, so big thank you for that. And then we also were able to send it off to people who have access or at least filed applications with crime victim reparations. Obviously, since we work for UOVC altogether, we do have access to a lot of that information. And so Melanie, I'm going to give a shout out to Melanie at CBR because she's been extremely helpful to help us reach out to, was it 16,000 people who have filed for CBR in the last 5 years. Vicki literally sent 16,000 emails. That was fun for her. And she got some interesting responses too. So 16,000 emails. So I just want everybody to keep that in the back of their mind though, because anytime you do research, you're going to have some bias, some background things in mind, because if these are all people who have filed CBR applications, now not everybody was awarded CBR, so these were people who might not have gotten it for, many reasons why they might not have been eligible, but anybody who filed an application, but most likely they are already part of the criminal justice system if they're filing a CBR application, correct? So you will see a lot of more, this is heavily on that side of they filed a police report. We are no means saying that definitely this many crime victims have actually filed a police report and been a part of the criminal justice system. We're very well aware there's a lot more out there. This is just who we had access to more. Okay, So there's a whole lot, there's always more to be researched, just a lot harder for us to get to those who are not reporting for those reasons. And then out of the people who did surveys, there was questions, some of you might have been on there too, that if you wanted to have an interview, if you wanted to be interviewed, then a lot of people checked off that boxes, both between the victims as well as the service providers. And so then we were able to use those to conduct interviews with people as well. Some of you might have even participated in interviews, which were extremely helpful. Yeah, this is where we're starting. Let's see here. I think I just talked about all of that. Yeah. Okay, so from the victim survey, so like I said, we have kind of 3 different parts that we'll hear. And you, don't worry, there's not really a test on this at the end. But are there? So from the victim survey, we had 704 victim responses. So that's great. Out of the 60,000 emails, about 5% returned. So we were thrilled to see 700 people responding to that on the survey. As you can see, the demographics, we feel it's fairly representative of Utah overall, between race, ethnicity, and age here. A little bit more on the younger end, but probably crime victimization, that's usually what you're gonna see. So,
especially since it's as a digital, it was a lot, like, it was an online survey, so
yeah.
some of the older population might have not, because of being online.
Yeah, an email address too, so that's part of it too. So yeah, 82% white, 13% Hispanic Latino, and then a smaller percentage among other races. Heavier between 18 to 24 up to 54 that are going to drop down. Well, a lot more female than male, 86% female, 11% male, a small percentage other. And usually that's because, as you'll see, a lot of the victimizations are gender-based between domestic violence and sexual assault. Just right there. Types of victimizations: 35% intimate partner, 20% sexual assault, and 21% parent of a child victim. We did not interview anybody under, nobody under 18 was filling it out. That was a whole other process we weren't going to do. So if it was a child abuse, we asked our parent to fill it out. We also have adult survivors of child abuse as well, that you would see in there too. So it's actually a pretty good spread of victimizations. This is usually what we see as types of crime victims. So that was good to see quite a variety there. And counties, we actually had at least one response from every county except for Pine and Beaver County. And so a pretty good spread across the state, obviously heavier in the Wasatch Front area between Salt Lake, Utah, Davis, and Weaver County, but then also Washington, Cache County, and other counties. We did get at least one response from. And then, okay, then these are the interviews. We were a little bit more selective in the interviews because of the 704 people who responded to the survey, and so the victims, how many was it? 300. Yeah, 300 were requesting an interview, which was a lot. We're like, oh, you know, which was almost a finding in of itself. We definitely did not have the capacity to interview that many people. We set aside the time and funds to interview 50 between advocates and victims, so we definitely didn't have that many. But what that said to us is these people want to talk to somebody about what happened to them. And so since we could not obviously interview every single person, we definitely followed up with resources and said, you know, there are people who would love to talk to you, just not necessarily for the survey. So we gave them that information as well. But we did select some of these as well to make sure that we were getting a good representation of different types of crime victimization. So we did have, you know, domestic violence, sexual assault, child abuse, etc. And then we made sure to get some more urban areas of the state and some more rural. Okay, that was the victim side of it. And then we had the victim service provider side of it. We had a total of, no, I don't have it on here. How many victim service providers again? 191. See, Vicky's the brains of the operation. I know, right? Vicky is, I just stand up here and try to make jokes. Okay, so 33% of the service providers are community-based, and then we had 11% prosecutor and 18% law enforcement-based advocates, so I kind of grouped them together, usually about 30% system-based. And we had kind of a smattering of not just others, but advocates maybe in other arenas, CJCs, CVR people, court personnel, campus, a few others like that. So a wide array of advocates or service providers have responded as well. Oh, there's 191. Yes, and those are also from almost every county, just because sometimes it's more your service area by the county. So we definitely got at least one response from every county that was being served. We know some of your programs definitely serve more than one county. Once again, a little bit heavier in the Wasatch Front area, but we definitely got everywhere, which is great. And similar with the advocate characteristics of the interviews, we had quite a few that were willing to be interviewed, not as many as the victims, and probably like, we're tired of talking to you guys, but thank you for those of you who were willing to be interviewed, and we tried to get a good representation among those as well. Okay, I know that was fast. We're definitely going to get this information out, but I wanted to get to more of the meat of the presentation, so Vicky's going to lead us over the assessment findings specifically for the criminal justice system. Take it away, Vicky.
Thanks, Tally. Oh, thanks. Okay. So like Tally mentioned earlier, we did have quite a bit of their contacts that we contacted in terms of crime victims reparations. And so it is heavier so we had 98% of the victims that filled out the survey and answered this question have reported to law enforcement. And then this was kind of your resolutions of the case. So you had just shy of 20% that had reported, but no one was charged. You had the offender charge and case was then dismissed, so that's about 7%. That's the red. The bright green was case was prosecutor and the offender was found guilty, which is good to see that. At least it was that high. And then we had the lower 1.5% was that they were found not guilty. And then reported but didn't pursue was that 3.5. Lower was the case is still pending. And other was either they didn't know what actually happened with their case at all, so they didn't know it was pending or things like that, or it just didn't fit one of those categories. But for the most part, the victim didn't know what their case was. They answered other. This one I thought was really interesting, but it's very not surprising at all, I guess, essentially. But this kind of broke it down by the 4 biggest crime categories. You have your sexual assault, DV, parent of a child, and then other crimes. And if you notice, the kind of teal dark green is sexual assault, and the reported not charged is significantly higher for your sexual assault cases versus any other type of crime. And with domestic violence, that's significantly higher for your prosecuted and found guilty, as well as child abuse is pretty close underneath that, and sexual assault is below 20%. That the victims that answered this question where the person was prosecuted and found guilty. And I think this is really telling with sexual violence, that they may do the whole step of reporting it. It might be that the victim, part of it is that reported but didn't pursue the case. So that was 10% of our sexual violence cases. But a lot of times they're not even going forward. Sorry, it's cutting out. Okay, there we go. So it was kind of disheartening to see this, but also not surprising because I've seen that as an advocate. This is essentially how they identified how they were assisted. And this is those that reported. So this is that 98%. They had service if they were explaining the criminal justice process, the advocate attended hearings or meetings with them, contacted criminal justice agencies for them. Criminal justice staff was aware of their feelings, and transportation services was fairly low, but still a service that was offered. And then emotional support was very high and other. Sorry, it cuts off a little on this for some reason on the screen, but these are from the interviews, this kind of themes that they saw throughout the interviews that also worked in conjunction with the surveys. But the things that went well in the criminal justice system, the victim gave this feedback with kind of the 4 areas that went really well for them, and it was a positive experience. And the percentage, oh no, doesn't have sorry, just cutting off some of it. But they felt supported. The advocates helped them feel supported by creating space for them to process and consider their options outside of that first meeting. So having that follow-up contact helped them feel supported. When they did have that consistent contact, that was always a really positive theme for victims. When the advocate was able to give clear expectations and describe what they were to expect, that was really helpful for them. And having an advocate that was really proactive in contacting them. Communication was a really common theme throughout this, and we'll kind of highlight that a lot. But having that communication, even advocates gave that feedback that sometimes is an area they want to improve on. But that communication really came back to really show those strengths. When there was that communication and that guidance from the victim advocate, it was a positive experience. So many victims in the interviews, 43% thought the advocates would give more support as they navigated it. So these are some quotes from the victims, and you guys can read it. I'm not gonna read all of them because there's several on here, but they overall had didn't feel prepared. Like the very last one says, I almost felt like I needed a course on maybe some law and justice system. So they felt like they needed to be an attorney to even understand it. And so I think this is really telling of how overwhelming the criminal justice system really is for victims. And having been an advocate for almost 10 years before, you're so used to the system, you're there every day, and so you sometimes forget that this is brand new for them, or this is really overwhelming. They don't know what arraignment is, they don't know what a pre-trial conference is, and they don't know what to expect. And so they've only maybe seen law and order, which is definitely not how the world works. So making sure that we're really explaining things. So these were some quotes from victims in interviews. And then some of them, they felt like they weren't adequately prepared for the reporting process. And that can sometimes be hard because advocates aren't always there at the forefront before they report to explain that process. So they're kind of coming to us, maybe law enforcement responded already and we're following up, or we're arriving on scene. So it's kind of, we're in a rock and a hard place essentially. But I think that the one that I liked in the middle is the victim in the interview said, I felt I was out of control and no one, including the advocate, really wanted to tell me the truth of it all. Something that I found out years later is the stuff, is the stuff you say to hospital staff, stuff you say to the police officer could be used against you, no one told me that. So they didn't really understand maybe the confidentiality of the advocates or what they were saying, and having that lack of education piece. Kind of that better communication was from a sexual assault victim as well. So this one, I apologize, there's a lot on this. Most of these other slides I reformatted, but there was so much on here that was gold, I just wanted to keep it all. But this was essentially if the victim felt their opinion was taken serious or was considered in the process, if they felt like their opinion was considered, and these were the answers. Like kind of the themes throughout this was like a fill-in answer. So this is how it was coded by the research team, was these answers. So the good news is that we had 40% that did feel they were taken seriously. Kind of right underneath it is that we had almost 39% felt like they weren't even considered. So you can have this half and half, this split divide. And then you had some that they felt like it was taken seriously, but still dissatisfied with the case, or they weren't taken seriously, or they were just overall dissatisfied with the case. So that's kind of showing where they felt like their opinion, putting the control. Yeah, sorry. Okay. So these were some quotes and things like that from the interviews of when they felt like they were being taken seriously and using trauma-informed language. They had 15% in the interviews indicate that the advocates or victim service providers, law enforcement got lumped in some of this as well, didn't use trauma-informed language. I think the hardest one to swallow and see is this middle one. Essentially the beginning of the quote is that she's been trying to reach out to the advocate or law enforcement and said, I'm scared every time I do it because I think they're going to get upset that I'm bothering them. So the last time I met with the detective, I said to him, I don't mean to be a pain in the butt. And he said, all victims' families are a pain in the butt. I was like, oh, my heart broke a little bit when I read that. And I I could see that be coming out of Officer Mile, not knowing that it was harmful to say that, like they're probably trying to almost reassure them maybe that they were not the only one. That takes a lot of time. But our words do matter, right, essentially. The one up above they felt like the advocate would just say, you need to find a way to move on. And she said, well, my son's been murdered, how am I supposed to move on from this? So having really that we are aware of our verbiage and our wording. The bottom one kind of relates back to crime victims reparations, but they really felt like, they said, and when you press charges, all of your hospital bills will be paid, which is definitely not UOVC stands on those benefits, especially now with House Bill 228, definitely changing for sexual assault. They also indicated that they felt like their 25% of those that were interviewed felt like their opinions weren't considered. And this one, the bottom one, was the victim that gave the feedback that I was never even able to talk to the prosecutor. All my opinions had to go through the victim advocate, and I didn't know if they even got relayed. So that was frustrating, not being listened to and thinking that they knew better than me. So I know that a lot of times this really is set up that the advocate's kind of that communicator. And if that is a setup, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just if you don't communicate back with the victim, hey, I talked to the prosecutor and this is what happened, or let me see if I can set up a time for you to meet with the prosecutor if it's appropriate. So I think kind of just taking that step back and realizing how it looks to the victim. Because you might be doing it, you did all the contacts and you did it, but they don't know you did it. They're just going to sit in limbo and wonder. And then this one was about, again, their opinions being heard. Advocates also emphasized the importance of having the victim's voice. This was from a system-based advocate. And I really like this quote because he or she, I don't know if it's female or not, sorry, that was an assumption there. But this advocate relayed in there that they had been in this process for a long, been in the advocate for a long time, and they would sometimes walk out of court and felt, wow, if we hadn't been there, I didn't know the victim would have been heard, or nobody would have known that the victim was even there. And so I really think that this shows how important your guys' role is in that criminal justice process, a system and community-based advocates, that we are sometimes the only one that's going to be there and stand up and make sure the victim's heard, make sure the prosecutor, the defense, or the judge knows that the victim is in the courtroom.
Can I make a quick comment on that too?
Yes.
Or sorry, just really quick, I was talking to an advocate out in the lobby earlier, and she was mentioning to me that, and I know this is varied among everybody's jurisdictions, but she said that she just interrupts the judge and was like, hey, excuse me, sir, and he usually looks for her and he's like, do you have anything else to add? And I think that's great. Like, I was like, oh wow, that's really great that the judge will let you do that, because it definitely depends on the courtroom. But the fact that this advocate had that relationship with the judge, and he's looks for, okay, yeah, I know she's gonna say something. And so just thinking back to yourself, like, if you had not been there, who really would have said anything for the victim, so it makes a big difference.
Thank you, Tally. This is probably my favorite quotes because it's positive, and showing how really the advocate ability to moderate information, help in that decision-making and interactions really influences the victim's experience. So the top quote, so when I first made my statement, we were in a little room and there was about 2 or 3 officers, I believe, and my advocate had come in with me. They'd been asking all these questions, and at times I didn't know how to answer them, to explain how I felt, and they would try to ask the same question in a different way. And she was like, just give her a time, just let her breathe. She even asked them to step out, give me a little bit of time. Just her being there helped me to calm down. And so it was like, okay, I'm really glad that I have her here to help me. And that probably seemed like such a small thing for the advocate to do. It seemed like a big thing, but that was what changed, for that victim to be able to have that support and know she was being heard, because she was feeling overwhelmed and she just needed a minute. And then the sexual assault victim, I think this is great that she did have a great experience with, I'm assuming crime victim reparations just by the quote, but said, I don't have any suggestions. I was and still am so thankful for crisis counseling I received at such and such agency. and not having to carry the financial burden of medical bills and medications that were directly related to my attack. I don't even know how I would have coped emotionally if I had to pay for my emergency room visit and appointments at the clinic post-assault. So I think showing how valuable our resources and services we do offer is in Utah. Okay. I'm still sorry. So with training, this was actually something that was surprising to me. We had asked if advocates if you had been trained in the response. And we had that 60% had felt like they received training on crime victims reparations, crime victims Bill of Rights, but we had almost 40% felt like they hadn't been trained in that. And that was definitely a huge finding for us to see that we really need to, because I feel like I'm always like talking and presenting about victims' rights in so many different trainings, and so seeing that we still really need to have more education on that. This is just kind of showing a breakout between system-based and all other agencies. So obviously system-based did have higher percentage that felt like they were trained on victims' rights, but we still have a long ways to go, since that is an essential thing for any advocate to know.
I'm gonna,
Yeah.
only because I'm like really, training based here. But what I also think this might be is how many of your agents and how many of your agencies have victims' rights built into their general procedures? Because it shouldn't just be, oh, I came to SWAVO, got a training on victims' rights. It should really be about when your agency hires you, you say, oh, this is how we protect the victims' rights, and we do this because of victims' rights. So sometimes I think that goes way beyond just advocates receive training and it's an agency kind of issue.
So much.
I was like attacked.
No, I think that is so true, because we might know that list of Bill of Rights, but then feeling like it is really something that you can do in your agency. You have the support and you have the structure. That's great. Thank you, Michelle. So these were what advocates indicated that they do to ensure victims' rights are understood. Some kind of more informal notifications are included in the brochure. They have the posters. They don't really have a process for engaging the victim in the discussion or drawing the attention, but they do at least have that obligated part where it's written and it's in the pamphlet. And then we had a more formal, so we had 48, they could answer more than one, it was coded this way, so that's why these responses don't add up to 100%, because they could answer more than one way they do it. Formal notification that every victim is notified through a formal process that includes both the brochure and the discussion, so that was about 46% had that process. Service provision, the provision of services to victims is a victim's right, and no other notification was really described. They just acknowledge that that is a right, and it's part of the service. And then we had part of them that they address victims' rights when it comes up, essentially, if there's maybe a problem or they raise a question about it. Referrals, that they don't do the notification about it, but they make sure they get connected to an agency that does. And then none, they were unsure of the process that they had for notification. And just know that some of the victim service providers that filled out the survey aren't exactly advocates, and we had other roles that filled it out as well. So we understand that's part of it. Sorry that it keeps cutting all of them off because we filled the screen too much. And then we had that, I think I just went back to the same exact thing. Okay, there we go. So we're going to do another mentee. It's the same code. It's going to be the next thing, and we want to see, did you have any of the findings of the victim's experience of the criminal justice process surprise you, or how you felt about findings? We went just over. Oh, should I want the code back up for a second?
Oh, the code's at the top of this one too.
Right here, the 91678749.
There we go. It's 91678749. Yeah, sorry, that color's hard to read.
It's okay if you weren't paying attention.
You can answer that.
I will find you. afterwards and give you the whole training again.
No hiking for you, sorry.
So I know who's not paying attention. Talk to you after class. What color? Almost exactly the same. Didn't have the numbers there. We're just waiting for these to come in, so just keep bringing them in. Oh, everybody's paying attention. The thing is, the people that aren't paying attention to fill out the survey. Or they're not in the lobby yet, they're talking. That's why. So they're not paying attention to that either. Well, this is a good, and I was like thinking, but I am shocked. It's like, maybe people aren't really shocked that criminal justice is so bad, it's shocked that it's still so bad. But yeah, it's about what we thought, or some were surprising, some were not. Anybody have it, whether put it in the chat or in, or just raise your hands and we can come out to you. Does anybody have any findings that were surprising or confirmed kind of what you thought that you wanted to bring up? Yes, and Vicky's gonna bring you the mic.
Interesting and really sad that the 13% who said they didn't know how their case turned out, or other, I'm assuming a lot of people said they didn't know. But they were involved enough to fill out the UOVC survey, so it just made me really sad that many people have no idea what happened with their case.
Thank you. I actually hadn't thought about that until you put it up. Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's like 13% is too significant. That, I'm like, oh yeah, whatever happened to that?
Callie, you got your answer.
All right, someone's paying attention, that's it.
When you should start asking you in your audits about your victims' rights and how you let your victims know.
And that's actually what I was gonna comment on, is because that was one of the first things that I learned in victim advocacy were the rights, because that's our whole job. Our whole job is around the rights. So that kind of shocked me that we had so many that don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, at first I thought, I'm sure, Rochelle's not in trouble, she's been training them. But and then it came to me like, if you don't know that you would train on rights, then maybe we need a better understanding of what that means.
So I am in trouble.
And no, you're not. It's the learners. No, it's not you guys. Oh, jeez. But thank you, Renee, because it is like, it should be kind of embedded in what we do because of crime victims' rights. You know, sometimes, you know, because I mean, the first one is dignity, respect. So I think it's pretty basic, right? That I think sometimes we just think, oh, right, of course. But I see,
And I think the question, the way it was worded, maybe some people thought they had to be like,
sure.
know about a specific statute, but it is statute, right? Bill of Rights are, but that might have been something a little confusing to them, the way the question was worded, to give credit.
Oh, yes, sir, Laura.
So by the time survivors get to me, some of them have been in the prison system for a very, very long time. And I've been finding that a lot of survivors do not know about the Victim Bill of Rights. I've been really shocked at how many of them do not know. I email them to every survivor I work with. It's just kind of disheartening that they don't know, and they don't know where that gap is and where they're not being told what their rights are.
Absolutely. Anything in the chat coming in? Okay. Feel free, I'm trying to be inclusive of the in-person and virtual, so if you're virtual, or if you have something you want to say virtually, we can unmute if you really would like to, or we can put it in the chat. Okay. We are going to move on to the next section because I have a lot of people who are threatening me that if I don't finish early, I'm going to be in trouble. So.
Is it Mariah?
We need the food. Okay.
It's an advocate.
Oh, sorry, no.
It's me. It's me. Sorry.
Oh.
We did plan this. And it's facing there. Okay, so we're gonna move into the next section of the needs assessment, which was more about kind of a few different areas, and I forgot to mention this earlier. We have a lot of data, like you don't want to see all of the data that we got this from, because I think it was close to 200 slides worth of just raw data, so that's definitely available for anybody who wants to, slog on through it. But being able to take all of that down, and it was hard because obviously someone was like, oh, this is so good, let's include this, let's include that, and we're like, well, we, do need to get through this, and so we had to kind of select some things here and there and kind of format things more clearly too. So just know that we could only pick out so many things, and some of you might have heard this presentation before because we've given it in other settings. We try to cater it a little bit depending on the audience. So the next section is just kind of some other areas that we touched on. But like I said, this is just a quick, highlight of that. But we definitely have more data. So we wanted to talk about the assistance that victim service providers in general, not just the criminal justice system, but just all services for crime victims, how that experience was for crime victims, as well as the service providers. So,
Just one note, sorry.
oh yes,
If
go
you
ahead.
see this like N number here,
Yeah.
that's how many answered that question. The N is the number. So we had, 700 originally started surveying, but 183 answered this question.
Yeah, to take it back to high school stats class, but there you go. Okay, so in the survey for the crime victims, one of the questions was if they received any help from victim service providers. 66% said yes, 33% said no, and I was like, wait, what? But we got your information from victim service providers. So maybe they didn't feel like they received the service, but so that was kind of telling too, is like, well, or that wasn't helpful, but that was interesting. And then the reasons why, and like I said, once again, this was heavily, not just it was from people who are involved with CVR, they probably had CVR in mind too. So they're thinking, oh, well, it's because it's from CVR, this is what CVR did for me, which we tried to make clear, like this is the whole victim service system. Once again, that's obviously, that's what this needs assessment showed, that we don't always think on the same line. So when they say that, they might just be thinking CVR specifically. Okay, so of the people who said that they did not receive services, 40% said that they were not offered, 14 said they were offered but declined, another 19 said they're offered but accessible, and then the other might have been an array of people there. Okay, now these next two slides are really interesting that we've poured over a lot on. You could read a lot into this too. So I could have a whole conversation on the next two slides, and I did actually earlier with Vicky. So this is from the victim side of things. If they've had problems or concerns that went unaddressed. So 33, almost 34%, a third, actually exactly, said yes, I had some problems and concerns that were not resolved. 66% of the victims said, yep, got my concerns resolved, I'm good. And when asked, okay, what concerns or why didn't they get resolved? Here was the top 5 answers that were coded. It was a qualitative response in that, so they had to code them to certain themes. 46% said it was a communication issue, so just keep that in mind. That's a major theme that we've seen throughout this whole needs assessment, was just there was not so much follow-up communication updates, information was not accurate. Like was comments over here, 13% was like, oh, I don't know what happened with that, no one ever told me that. I reported it, and then that was it. So yeah, communication was the number one. The availability of services, there's just no services there to meet needs or no capacity to do that. The financial, like I said, this one might be a little bit more related to CVR, but could be just in general too, was lack of financial support, or including categorical denial for a specific reason, and the lack of assistance for transportation. Quality, we touched on this a lot. The victim felt blamed. Obviously, we know they're probably not going to be coming out and asking for more services if they don't feel good about getting them. Demeaned, not supported, the staff lacked training, on the processes or the impact of recurrent victimization. So that one's pretty sad. And safety, lack of resources to ensure the victim's safety, including length of protective order, cost of security systems in general. So these are the 5 reasons why the victims didn't receive services. So we asked a similar, not exactly the same question to victim service providers. This is the next slide. If they had any unmet needs, if the people they're serving, they weren't able to meet their needs. 82% said that rarely happens, and 18% said it regularly happens. So we're seeing a lot different perception of clients' needs getting met from the victims end versus the service providers end. And what's interesting, and like I said, these are different perceptions of the question, but what they weren't able to help with were very tangible things. I think we always have this list in our heads because it always feels like barriers. You guys can set them off, I'm sure. Oh, there's no housing or shelter. Oh, they need more legal assistance, we can't help, financial stability, emergency funds, all the kind of checklist of things that unfortunately for many issues, which we'll talk about in a minute, we cannot address, right? But what we hear the victims saying is like, yeah, it would have been nice to have some more financial assistance, but they're asking for more like intangible things like communication, quality of service, like when we talk to you, are you gonna blame me? Are you gonna make me feel bad? The safety and being able to feel safe while doing that. So while the victims are definitely needing tangible things such as protective orders and shelter and housing, some of it is more of just what they're getting when they come in. So while there is always and there will be a gap and what we can do more, you guys do amazing things every single day and it never feels like enough. Remember, a lot of the what they're valuing sometimes the most is how we're offering those services. Are you getting that communication out there? How are you communicating with them? How are you ensuring safety when you do so? Because sometimes that is really what makes the difference between what matters and what doesn't. So, and think of everything you already have done, for crime victims and going above and beyond to do those services. Okay. So coming along with that, in the interviews, talking about there's discrepancy between the services that were offered and what they were needed, or that they were not offered the type of services that would have been beneficial. So I think this comes into that question of, if you're working in your own agency, you have your list of services like, yeah, well, we do this and this and this and this, and they're offered all of this. And that is so great, good job. But there might be so many services that they don't even know that they need, or they might know that they need it, but you might not be the one to offer that, or you might not have even asked, right? So sometimes we have to really kind of step out of ourselves and be like, look, it's not just about what we offer, it's really about what do you need, and what can we provide that for you, and how can we help you get that? And that's going to be a bigger focus of these next steps we'll be doing is how can we fill those gaps? We know nobody wants you guys to be able to do everything for them. That's not really your job. That's a big ask, of course. But how we're making sure that we're asking those questions that they might not know that they have, and helping to make that easier for them. You guys can go ahead and read some of these quotes, but the first one just says, because my case actually involved criminal justice, family justice, and immigration, because there's not one thing that can help me with everything. I have to go through 3 or 4 different agencies or ways to get the help. And I was like, wow, only 3 or 4, right? There usually is quite a bit more. And as many as you know, sometimes being a victim of a crime is a full-time job of everything that they're having to do to go through. And unfortunately, there's not always ways to get around that. But as much as we can help mitigate that, the better it is for them. Okay, so kind of going into that, because you're probably all feeling very overwhelmed at this point, we should do another feelings check, right? I hate telling, number 1. Okay, so the advocate caseloads, and this was actually kind of interesting too. So we asked, how overwhelming is your caseload? And 40% nearly said overwhelming, 61% said not or little. I'm like, is there anyone between? They're like, no. Nobody is whelmed. We're just not. No, we're, but 40% significant. I'm sure that I actually was a little bit surprised. I thought it might be more. Because it is, and I imagine probably the 60%, we should have had that meme of that car that's like, you know, going under the water. I think that so many people like, I'm okay, I'm good, I'm not overwhelmed, and you're like, meantime, on fire. Everything's fine, we're fine, everything's fine. So I imagine probably even some of that 60% is some are like, no, I got this, but it's quite exhausting for normal people, but you guys are all superheroes, right? Of the people who answered that, 100% was coded as staffing capacity. There's just not enough people to help with everything that's being done. Some of this actually kind of overlaps, of course, finances and staff turnover can definitely feed into that too. And this is on all ends, so it's not just, and I hate sometimes this, oh, community-based, system-based advocates, I'm like, everybody, please stop. There's enough work for everybody to go around. We all have important and different functions. But that is built on all ends. So there's no need to be saying, oh, they're not doing anything over here. We have a hard job. Everybody's job is hard. Okay, except for maybe mine. You guys can apply for book club director when I go one day. But everybody has hard jobs. And so system-based advocates.
90% of your time in meetings.
I do a lot of meetings. I do book club. It's fun. Another plug. System-based advocates talk a lot about, I haven't really been a system-based advocate specifically, but from what I know, a lot of it, you get a huge caseload. There are a lot of reports coming in from all different types of crimes. And sometimes you only have a few minutes or send a letter out. And then sometimes you get, like this person's talking about here, a homicide case. And there goes your life, right? You're dealing with that 24/7. You know, and especially a lot of system-based advocates, depending on your jurisdiction, it might just be you. Anybody like that in here? You're the only one in your agency? See a couple? That's good. Yeah, I mean, it's just like, hey, I am a one-person show. No one is in your city right now. We're okay, you know, because you came here. And I'm glad that you're here. There's probably more people online, you know. You're like, what? You go home, right? I know, yeah, sorry, jinxed you. Yeah, they're all online listening to the radio at the same time. So yeah, you usually have, and that's an exhausting toll too. Like I'm big on team. I like to talk to my people and process things. I know you've got your other support there too that aren't advocates, of course, that's necessary. That'd be hard to have somebody that doesn't do what you do and be able just to talk that out. So that's another issue. Community-based also, a lot of times community-based are more deeper into the issues than maybe a system-based might be. So you have to have a bigger realm of, we're going to talk about this, and this, and this, and this, and this. So theirs might be more of a depth issue of every single client, whereas the system-based might just have a huge caseload, and some of it is both. Community-based, sometimes an issue is everybody's getting pregnant, it seems like, and there's no, just have a lot of 20-something-year-olds working at these agencies. Myself, I think I was definitely had a couple of babies while I was working as community-based advocate. Now they're here running out there, probably starting a fire. Anyway, this is great about getting older. So that a lot of them are someone's out for maternity leave, then someone comes back from maternity leave, and someone else goes on maternity leave, right? You know, gotta cover for each other. That gets pretty exhausting, and you don't really have somebody to have the funding to hire some temp workers, right? So people just take on other people's caseloads, and we don't get vacations, right? So we go to go out for training. Like that's our vacation. Okay. We're like, oh, we reach out, we have you go to lab. Okay. Another area that we feel is significant to be asking information on is victim feedback mechanisms. Not surprisingly though, but there's really not a lot in place right now as far as agencies providing any meaningful feedback from victims. We're not mad. We're concerned. No, just kidding. Oh, we are. We're not angry though. But we get that. I mean, you've got so much to do on your plate. It's not really easy to get that. There's not really a good time, you know, but it is important to be understanding that. So victims, where they asked to provide feedback, 87% said, I would ask what I thought afterwards. You know, we did have some agencies that has some interesting and well thought out feedback mechanisms, but for the most part, it might be a survey that might not be used for some things. And we talked about the barriers to that from the advocates of organizational, just there's no time and resources to invest in that. And, you know, if you really can't, you know, you don't really want to even spend the time and resource to put it out there. You can't do anything with that data. It's hard to get people to participate, you know, it's not like when they're sitting there crying because their husband was just murdered, you're like, hey, can you fill a survey? And I said, how am I doing, you know? No one really wants that. They probably could be a really bad survey too. And then, yeah, that kind of goes with the appropriateness of it, of course. And then they don't know when, you know, and a lot of us here aren't necessarily like, it's a whole other realm. You know, I've talked to people who run businesses as far as like quality assurance is actually a whole other method that you really need to look into. So it's not necessarily that a lot of people's expertise, and I get that. Oh, big bad credentialing word. Okay, this causes a lot of, I didn't know this is such a hot topic, but it is. Credentialing, we talked about that. A lot of people have this, a lot of thoughts on that. That's great, we like that. So the idea of credentialing or some way of professionalizing the advocacy system, basically we're like, hey, do you like it or not? Was the question. Oh, here's the question. Would advocate credentialing be beneficial overall? 77% of the victim service providers said yes, 22% said nope. And we broke that out a little bit more. We did see a higher percentage of on system-based advocates who would appreciate the credentialing. 84% of the system-based said yes. All other agencies, only 70% of them said yes. So there was a little bit of difference there. Not too substantial, but noticeable. And some of the opinions about that was, like I said, they were mixed, but a lot of people saw some benefits and some drawbacks of doing that, and making sure that it's regulated to get that. So I'm just gonna go through those briefly because I know we've got more to do. So just showing some of the benefits that people cited at that would increase training and specific training, not just, you know, random training, which we never do anyway. But increased training, the standardization of the role, people found that really beneficial. So not everybody's just doing their own thing in their own areas, like, oh, there's something to follow. If you like me, I like instructions, I like to follow that. The quality, hopefully will be better of services. A big feedback we got was professionalizing it. People would see us more as not just, oh, that's the girl you send in when people cry. I've been that person a lot. I've been the person crying a lot too. So, and someone's had it, you know, said for me. So professionalizing that would be nice so that we're not looked down as that, and then continue education requirements, quality of staff, increased commitment, hopefully. And, you know, some people said, hopefully it would help wages, you know, to say, hey, look, I'm a certified victim advocate, you know, pay me more, right, because we all deserve more. Some concerns, very legitimate concerns that came up was it could really deter potential employees that might be really great. Right, I'm sure nobody in this room, but actually some people have all kinds of letters after their names. So I'm like, oh, you can be scary, you know, please don't come here. So sometimes you might get some really great people who do not have that, and you can't really hire them because you know made a requirement, right? Cost is always going to be a barrier. It could be more burdensome just for the agencies to make sure that's being happening. Was going to talk about the flexibility of hiring. And then I guess I kind of got that on this eligibility, like a false sense of an advocate is competent or not based on credentialing, which, yeah, I get that. Okay, we're going to talk about a few of the suggestions we got from the surveys to improve victim services. Then we got one more little Mentimeter for you guys, so hold tight.
I'm gonna try to go through these kind of quickly so we can.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Okay, so the first ones that we're gonna go through is the victim suggestions of ways to improve victim services. So I'm gonna spend a little more time on this one, just because we love to have the victim's perspective. And suggestions for so we kind of broke it out, the research team broke it out in a micro. Really weird. I'm sure it's me, but okay. They kind of broke it out in a micro, macro, and then like services. So the macro is kind of this state level essentially, and having that the criminal justice system should address victims' rights as well as offenders' rights. That's something that they gave back, treat victims better, get training on trauma, criminal justice process moves too slow. Victim assistance to the criminal justice system is also delayed in terms of notification. And we kind of have a discussion about that, how it's going through the postal service, right, instead of maybe email or another way that's quicker. Provide information to victims about the criminal justice process, so they want that feedback more. Provide more support to victims throughout that process. They wanted to see more awareness and then coordination between agencies. I thought that was interesting that the victim picked up on that perception that having that kind of that warm handoff, if you can have that and you have those relationships built with the agencies you're referring to, really does go a long way, and the victims notice that differentiation. And then it said also repeat yourself like continuously, so they don't mind if you repeat yourself or say things you felt like you said again. They want to hear it again because they maybe didn't remember it from the first time. Kind of on an organizational level, communication, this was a big one, was that increase outreach and follow-up, be proactive in initiating the communication. The victim doesn't want to always feel like they have to reach out to you. That was something that we got feedback from. Provide multiple ways to communicate with the advocate, so not having that it can only be this way, having a way that's beneficial for them. Having check-in, had like one quote we didn't include on the slide, but she said, I wish someone would have even just called me a year later to check in and see if I was doing okay. Because then it validated that even if I'm not okay a year later, it's okay, because someone's checking on me again to see if I'm okay. So having that follow-up, being trauma-informed. Obviously, the victims didn't necessarily use the term trauma-informed. This is just how it's coded by the researchers that know trauma-informed is a term, so just to clarify that. But having that support and having it long-term and consistent, having patience when explaining the process, listening more, being empathetic when cases are dropped or they don't want to pursue the case with reporting, making sure the victims feel important. And one thing we did get several quotes and things on was having one advocate, they felt like they were kind of bounced around and they have to retell kind of who they are and what their situation is. So having them not feel like they're bounced around. And then it was interesting that the victim says kind of this increased capacity for staff, how that the staff don't come across as busy, exhausted, or burnt out. And that just shows you how like thinly stretched we are, right? We're trying to do so much, cover so many gaps in between all the different systems and everything like that. And so really the victims can see that the advocate's overwhelmed too. Accessibility, making it easier to get help, and ensure every victim has an advocate. Inclusiveness, to improve cultural relevance, availability of non-speaking staff, have translated documents and translated websites, and increased number of staff. I'm not gonna read this whole quote, you guys can read it, but I kind of like that he just said, maybe keep an open mind and not have that the victim feels judged based on their gender or their status or their military or their background. This is just specific to services and what they feel would improve victim, their experience is safety, improving the process of a protective order. So it's quicker, and serving it is a quicker process. Mental health was a big one, to increase statewide access to therapists, have that the therapists are trained in trauma, increase the length of time therapists can be seen, increase, therapy services for children and support opportunities. Housing, increasing housing options, including temporary housing when safety is a concern. We obviously want more housing options too. Right now, it's an insane time, right, for housing in general, and then medicals are pretty small, but increase the number of sexual assault nurse examiners and the amount of support available in the medical system. And then this was the advocates' responses on ways they feel like would improve the system or just the victim's experience, not necessarily the criminal justice system, but their overall. And interesting enough, you guys said communication too. So that was kind of the top for the victims and it was the top for the advocates. increase communication with victims, ensure it's long-term, proactive, and personal. So you guys are hearing the victims. I think you guys are recognizing that as well. I think that's great. Give more case updates, give more information on resources and what to expect. Trauma-informed, have a process, but that process of reporting is more trauma-informed and includes law enforcement and criminal justice response. So having it go through that education piece essentially, or the training was kind of down here, that they want law enforcement, prosecutors, judges, medical providers, we want to see that training going to all of them. More accountability for offenders. I'd love to see that too. Kind of continuing on with this, victims' voices ensure victims are represented at state level committees, be inclusive of all kinds of survivors, ensure victims' voices are heard throughout the process of reporting and receiving services. Improving that kind of process of reporting, resolution, restitution, it's taking too long, right, essentially. Staff, you guys need more staff, need more help, so that you can, you're not so stretched thin, having that collaboration, have better communication between and connection between agencies, more financial resources. Obviously, we would all want more money, right? Access to more money. Reduce barriers, including allowing for longer stay or more non-shelter housing options. And then awareness, increasing the awareness of the understanding of dynamics of abuse, prevention and services. And then providing that wraparound, provide more crisis gaps and address gaps and provide needs not related to victimization. Okay, so we kind of want to see what resonates most with you. Same code, it's the 916787449. And I will go to that. Just hit next. Sorry. Okay. So I know you guys need a minute. The code's up at the top again, 916787449. Tally did a great job with her graphics.
That's my other title.
I had this experience with a Verizon person. I felt like the SWAVs in the DMV. I was like, oh my gosh, just tell me I can have myself on. Anyway, so if you want to see kind of what resonates with you, what you feel like you've already experienced, or like maybe something that helps you feel like you want to now like make a change, or nobody wants it.
Open answer.
It's open answer, so you can just type in an answer. There we go. The substantial difference between advocates' perspective and victims' perspectives. It's interesting that communication needs to be improved from both points. The view of overuse is sad. We're all headed that way, and it's important to be informed. It's good, yeah. Ensuring victims have necessities. I like learning that victims wanted more help emotionally than for tangible things. I think they're just having survivors not like being bounced around advocates, unfortunately get so much to turn around that it's hard to avoid for sure. We know that that's an avoidance, and maybe that communication piece of why they have a different advocate, right? We have that additional explanation that might appease them essentially. Want to have better explain victims' rights, great info, work to improve their services. Need more focus on following up with victims, communicating more often, and also helping them feel like they're not a burden. I feel like seeing that some of the tangible needs the victims have, such as communication, is something I can control and do better with. So you feel like you can control that, that's great. Offer more ways for clients to reach me, sorry. Definitely guys are overworked and overstretched, both victims and advocates, but communication is important. I think that's great to notice that. So I don't want to leave people out, but remember victims might be getting some information, but they literally don't remember, so being told over and over is okay. Definitely a good reminder. We move on to the next case too easily. Communication always needs to be improved. The need for us to raise the bar statewide, improve unified response, for sure. That's kind of my role, what I'm supposed to do. Trying to help that. Long-term follow-ups, great to, hey, thanks whoever did the shout out, I appreciate it. We'll end just for the last little bit, sorry. A lot of these things seem like issues we don't have control over, but I wish we did, yeah, for sure. Communication is key, something you know when, but easily forgotten when you have a high caseload and turnover. for sure. And I can remember like dreading the call to like call the victim site, so I delay it, and I have to call and give them bad news. I'm gonna do that after lunch, right? I want to do good things. So sometimes that delay, then you get you get called out on the site. I should do it. Oh, yeah, sorry, was there anything in the chat? They could have added it on here.
Yeah, if there's anything in the room too, because sometimes you don't want to go on the med team, so if there's anything else.
Yeah, if you guys want to make a comment verbally, that's also acceptable. Polly's ready. She's ready.
I think this was excellent information, and I want to just thank you for all your hard work and effort in doing this, because there's a lot of very good things here that is going to help us improve our services, make changes, and we can back it up though with some statistics. So
Yeah.
I can see this helping us increase our funding, different things like that. So
For sure.
great job.
Thank you. So kind of what we have as takeaways and what our research team gave us as takeaways, Kelly came up with this, the 4 C's. Clear communication and constant contact is essential. Victims and service providers' perspective of the services offered don't always align. Keeps telling me. I just do not turn my head. I gotta keep the mic with me. So, victims want to have a voice. Getting their feedback is crucial in that evaluation process, even though it feels sometimes so pointless. They actually do want to give feedback. Service providers, we need more training and support. And this was like our research team kind of came up with back with these ones for us is gaps in services are sometimes a result of restrictions or that siloing of service providers to funding sources. And victims need wraparound services that last longer and address a wider range of needs. Problems in communication between stakeholders can have that negative impact with victims, and then need improvement around services that are culturally relevant and trauma informed. It was interesting to kind of hear the research, because she's the researcher, Dr. Christian Starber, that was kind of the lead on this, talking about like it looked like a lot of times that we limit our services to our funding that we're getting, right? So we have that checklist that we need to make sure we make for our funding. And a lot of times for nonprofit, it does come down to funding sources of what you can offer, and you're limited to that, right, essentially. And for system-based, you're limited to what your organization is going to allow you to offer, essentially. So, and sometimes it doesn't align with what the victim needs, unfortunately. So kind of our next step. So what do we do with all this data? There's, like I said, even more data that we didn't cover. We tried to get the highlights, even though I know that doesn't seem like a highlight. We really only like half the data, but we are going to be coming to you. I feel like I'm going to be going on tour, Rochelle and I, and Tally, yes. So we're going to be doing regional meetings. It's going to be broken up by your like district or court districts. It's just easier to do it that way. And we'll have a half-day kind of training and really have that open discussion. We really want to kind of see your guys' perspective. This will be kind of us giving you guys what the data showed, but also really want to hear what you guys need, essentially, as well. And we will do a training on victims' rights in every region. We may be discussing mass casualty, possibly, depending on where we're at in the AMET's process of that. Look at legislative updates or changes that are important, and then discuss those needs. And then we'll have a virtual option, and we'll do like a statewide one as well. And then we do plan on holding town halls. And this will be a public meeting that community members, victims, survivors, advocates, anyone can attend. We'll have at least 2 virtual, and we may do some in person as well. We haven't decided. And we're going to reach out to those that were interviewed, the victims that said they wanted it, the ones that filled the survey, they wanted to be interviewed but weren't, and see if they'll attend our town halls to give their perspective. And then from those regional meetings, we really need you guys to help us in creating that strategic planning task force so that we can look at making those changes and really having this needs assessment be meaningful and making the appropriate changes, giving you guys those support structures. And so these are kind of the things we'll talk about at the strategic planning task or on the task force. And then our pipe dream, we'll see what happens, but we do want to create a victim task force. So based off of those town halls, having really that, because a lot of times we have only one victims on this committee or two victims, but they can't represent like every type of victimization essentially. So we really want to get an array of victims that will give us their opinions, and that we are going to take them. So we want to have that they can have that voice in the process, and we'll hold quarterly meetings with them. And this will be something that can be really important in the legislative process to have, that they can give that feedback to legislators. So it's kind of our next steps. I have a lot of work to do. But do you guys have any questions? Look at that, 4:31. You can have questions, sorry. I just.
And I just wanted to, is this working? Is someone turn off my mic? Yes. It's on. No.
4:32. I put it on 4:35.
Yeah, right, I've got mine. So we really want to get out that, this is not the end, it's not giving everyone else, oh, that's really good information, no, okay, let's go back and do our jobs again. Like, this really needs to be conversations we're having. I mean, I know you guys know these things, we are literally preaching to the choir right now. These are all things that you've been seeing, but to take this back, invite the stakeholders within your community to be coming to these town hall meetings. You guys really need to be the ambassadors for us, to be talking to the prosecutors. I mean, I talked to like 4 people, like sat in a lot of it, like, this is exactly what we're talking about. It's like, it's still happening. We have made a lot of progress in crime victims' rights and the way they're being treated. But it feels like if we're not pushing this forward, it will naturally slide back. When you already know this, there was a bill proposed in this last session about really taking crime victims' rights back 30 years. I'm probably gonna mess up how it was put, but Gary, just jump in and correct me, but yeah, that one of the defense attorneys was saying how hard it's been for ever since 1994, you know, when victims got these rights, how really hard it's been for them to prove a case in court because they can't throw a victim up there in a pre-trial hearing and allow the defendant to interrogate them and question their character. The preliminary, thank you. See, this is what I have here. The preliminary hearing, and we really need to change the statute so that we can subpoena witnesses and victims before then too. And if you guys heard that, the bill was not even proposed, it was just the idea of it, but it's coming back. I mean, we really, I know we talked about lobbying, there's a difference of that, we're clearing that up, but talking to the people in your community, talking to who is, you know, the legislators in your community, who are the people that are maybe not the lawmakers, but have a lot of sway on them, you know, and letting them know, talking to them about going to city council meetings, saying, hey, I was helping a crime victim with this last week, and she was badgered up on the stand. You know, we really need to be getting this information out there so that they're knowing this is happening, you know. I mean, the people that we usually see it happen is when it happens to one of their family members, or, you know, oh yeah, that happened to somebody I know. Let's make it somebody that they know so that we can actually produce change, and you guys need to be the people that are bringing that to them, because it won't change, you know, I mean, these things will keep on happening. And so we really want to get out there, we really want to form the strategic plan so that we can see some bigger changes so crime victims can be treated better in the criminal justice system as well as the victim services system overall. So you guys are the experts out there, we're just hoping we can bring these issues to light so that victims can have a better chance. So other questions, comments, thoughts?
I just want to add that I hope people realize that, like, you guys are doing amazing work. There was a lot of positive comments and things like that in the interview, and they had, like, the advocate was the one that made that difference. So just know you guys are doing a lot of work. We always know that there's, I mean, the purpose of this was to find gaps, right? So we wanted to find what wasn't working. So I just want people to leave like, oh man, I suck at everything. You know, just know that you guys are awesome. So. And I'm here to support you.
I think you guys are the ones that are like holding back the floodgates, I guess is a better way to say it. You know, because you've done such amazing work that it's like, oh no, if you weren't here, it's like, but just kind of holding back all of that right now, it's just, it's near impossible, so. Any other parting words on that? I'll hand it back over to Rochelle. Yeah. Okay, thank you, ready?